we have found our sanctuary in Salon Sanctuary, who has made this wonderful little film called Babylon with Ezra Knight as a narrator, who is just, chills. And here we have Jessica Gould and Ezra Knight to talk to us about it. Welcome.
Thank you, Eva. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting us to join you. And thanks for covering the film. This was a project that was commissioned by Casa Italiana NYU, and to take a very wide historical look at the repetition of ghetto and Renaissance throughout history. Because the ghetto we think of as a recent phenomenon that happened only in the United States. And the Renaissance we think of as something that happened 500 years ago in Italy. But the two repeat themselves, and the ghettos of Europe that were originally designated for Jews, and the Renaissance of Italy, but the Renaissance happened in Harlem as well, which was a great flowering of African-American literature and music and culture. The dominant cultures of both, the dominant classical music culture of Europe and the popular music culture of the United States absorbed influences, shall we say, that's a polite word, absorbed influences from these oppressed minorities who were not allowed to participate in society and were walled off, literally and figuratively. And yet their contributions changed the history of Western music in 500 years apart. And so that's what this film was designed to explore through a musical span of 400 years of history, celebrating the anniversary of Salomone Rossi, the brilliant Jewish composer who was born in Mantova. And we were so fortunate to have so many gifted people, primarily Ezra, who did such a brilliant recitation of Psalm 137, which is so striking because it's a biblical text that was written, God knows how many thousands of years ago. And it says, our captors, our tormentors made us sing for them. While they tormented us, we were supposed to sing. And that never stops. And isn't it fascinating that this was written by some anonymous bard or person thousands of years ago, and it's still happening now. And we had the contribution of the Kaleidoscope Vocal Ensemble, which was founded by Ariana Bella, Filipino-American conductor, to address the inequalities that are rampant in the early music world, where we only see white faces most of the time. For the last few decades, since the early music renaissance of itself, of the last 50 years, it's been very, very white. And the composers have been very, very white and European. And all of a sudden, there's all this research going on where, oh, there were Black composers in Tudor England. There were Jewish composers in Renaissance Italy. There were so many more diverse voices than we've ever been allowed to hear about. And the people who are among us today, who are so fantastically talented, would have been silenced years ago. Why? Because of the color of their skin or because of their religious orientation. And that is ridiculous. Look at what we've missed out on. So what happened in the opera world decades ago with Marian Anderson finally being allowed to sing at the Lincoln Memorial because of Eleanor Roosevelt. Now we are finding in early music, there is so much talent and so many gifted individuals who need to be heard. And so the Kaleidoscope Ensemble is a multi-ethnic, multicultural ensemble dedicated to early music.
Amazed at the historical range of the Salon Sanctuary presentations. And this film, eclipsed so much geography, so much time, and had that unifying theme of, exile and creativity, but forced under duress that was just overwhelming. How did you first get interested in early music and also in trying to present it to a modern audience in really interesting places? Is what I've always loved about your concerts, when we could actually go to them live in New York.
Oh,
And
thank you.
your unusual instruments. I mean, you get these like historical instruments that I never even heard of.
To use the instruments to present this music,
Yeah.
you have to go back to the early instruments, not just because it's nice and they look pretty, but because the tuning system is different.
You know what? A lot of this is the beauty of artists collaborating together. Some of it's chaotic, flying by the seat of your pants, you know, risking your ass being exposed, taking that leap and doing it. This is a testament to just collaborative effort, to the vision of Jessica Gould, I mean, and the greater vision, of course, of Salon Sanctuary, of which I'm kind of now a veteran.
Yeah.
It was, because here we are in COVID-19 and experiencing the effects thereof and being forced to coalesce things into this narrow space. And that just kind of speaks to the greater power of the art and what Jessica's vision is and what the capacity is of artists collaborating and how some of this stuff can actually stick to the wall. And it did. So I recorded my pieces in my bathroom, some of which in my bathtub, and others, you know, so this is, if you did like a making of kind of video, it would be hysterical. How disparate and weird this thing was thrown together, but the rest was the passion and the desire to present this text. So I didn't know what Jessica was going to put around it. I just knew my part. And then the rest was Jessica's production qualities and ideas and vision, kind of bringing these other individuals and artists together. And voila, here we have what's an interesting piece of significant import, and that embodies everything that I know I'm about. I mean, I wouldn't have hit it off so well with Jessica, as well as the wonderful Erica Gould, her sister, who are two twin forces of nature, but their visions and their ideas agree with mine, especially as it relates to the classical realm. Mine primarily through text, but then conjoining that with music and song and a greater vision that arcs into inclusiveness. So it's just a wonderful moment that came out of some wonderful chaos we threw ourselves into, and it landed. So
all of those disciplines have so much to offer one another. And that's the great thing. That's what we learn. We learn so much.
I'm just also interested in your interpretation of the song, which again, it was really dark and really shocking. You know, it took something that you hear all the time and you think of as like this piece of mourning, of, you know, like regretting the past and feeling bad about exile. But you brought a very refreshing defiance to it that I think is an important part of the whole tradition of this ghetto culture and ghetto creation, that, you know, like it is a sense of being, we're oppressed people, but we're also defiant, and we're going somehow either to be allowed in or to make room for ourselves. And I thought that was another thing that unified the work of all these different places and time periods in a very strong way.
I think we're at a real amazing
to it.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was a little surprised when I first did a little sample piece for Jess, because we hadn't talked a lot about it, right? It's just kind of simpatico and instinct, and I have this voice.
Ezra, here.
Right, here, do this.
Do this.
And so I sent her this take, you know, and I was like, there's no way she's gonna want this. This is too fucking scary. You know, this black dude with the teeth and like this voice, kind of like, so I kind of like was just goofing around, sort of, but I didn't think it would stick like that. And she loved it. She loved it. It was like, wow. that speaks to kind of where we are right now. I think Jessica's taking it on.
Sounds like a fascinating project that you're all on. I'm so glad
Yeah,
you're doing music. It's absolutely wonderful. And
sure.
thank you. I'm afraid we have to move on because we're running out of time. But I
All
want to thank you so very, very much, and thank you for what you're doing. I mean, it's absolutely, it's great. I'm a musician myself, and I'm so glad to see that is getting as much attention as theater is. Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Eva?
very much. Okay, and now from highbrow culture to some highbrow drinking with Will Petre, who has initiated his cocktail experiment and put it now into a Zoom, and now it's called Social Alchemix.
Social Alchemix Live. Yeah. So we from the origins of how this thing started, it's had many different lives. So we are about 5 weeks away from our fundraising campaign to make the actual physical game, which is called Social Alchemix. It used to be called a cocktail party game, but we have pivoted away from cocktails, although cocktails are highly encouraged. About a year ago, a little more than a year and a half ago, we started doing live parties, cocktail parties, as sort of this. We were calling them social experiments, which is an interesting sort of phrase, but I'm interested in analog ways in which people can connect, and the question of like, can we create an analog experience where a group of strangers can feel a little bit more connected? And so our social experiments that we were doing live in person before COVID was sort of framed by that scientific question. And our hypothesis was yes, and the procedure was we get a bunch of people together, we play this game, which then was called a cocktail party game, now is called Social Alchemix. And we sort of let the cards do the work. And we can see if people can like turn off their phones, lean into each other a little bit more, let their curiosity sort of pave the way. We're fascinated by the alchemy of a cocktail party. It's like made up of many different things, lights and music and cocktails, but it's always the people, the conversations, and those create the kind of bonds that hopefully can last forever. So yeah, so now we're doing them online, and they've been really fun. Eva was there a couple of days ago. It was a Friday night. How was your experience?
I got to see it when it was at Chelsea Music Hall, so I got to see it live, and there I actually had the cocktail. It's funny, at home I had water, but I'll have a cocktail, and it was so much fun because you learn so much about people, and I'm curious how you came up with these cards in the first place, like how you were able to find like these elements and then the meaning. It was sort of like tarot cards, but it was something else, and it drew people out, especially because the questions were so difficult to kind of like jar your brain, like, well, you asked me what seduces me, and your first thought is, some guy, physical, but then I'm like thinking, no, what am I obsessed with? And that's when I ended up with theater and other people too. They came up with it veered off into interesting ways, and then all the people that asked questions, and it just made this, it was just fascinating because you learn, and even the person talking learns about themselves because the answers even surprise what's coming out of their mouths. Yeah. And I did it sober and it came out. It was cool. And Mark actually was just a plain old witness.
Yeah, but I do love the idea of those two very different decks of cards. The ordinary objects, which also are not that ordinary when you interpret them, and the alchemical symbols, which open up a completely different realm, which could be spiritual or poetic or something else. And are all the questions of the combinations of the two set, or is it sort of like an artistry of how you interpret them? Because the questions were very surprising, and that's what led to really interesting answers.
The questions are set. So right now we have 10 alchemical cards. You can't really see them here, but these correlate with the 7 ancient metals of the alchemists and the 3 heavenly principles. Alchemists thought that combinations of these things would create all matter on Earth. And then, yeah, there's everyday objects or things to which we ascribe our own subjective meaning, like a waterfall, a hammer, a skyscraper, an airplane, which all sort of correlate, at least for me, into things like ambition, things we monumentalize, passion, destruction, etc. And so I kind of took those elements, you know, something that we know, something that is a little bit older than our time, and I kind of got to the cores of those, and I created 108 questions that are meant to sort of like, you can ping them to either card, but they are intentionally very open. You know, like we found that questions beginning with who, what, where, when, why, and how often yield really, really meaty answers. And you let people, you know, it's almost like tarot, where I had such a, I mean, this is a sort of a sidestep, but I had such a preconceived notion of tarot until a couple of years ago when someone finally did a tarot reading for me, because I was like, oh, tarot cards are just for people who want to like, you know, who don't want to take responsibility for their lives, blah, blah, blah. I had such like a jerky response to it. But like, we all have things that are in our own head. And so when you have these cards that are archetypes, we fill in the gaps. So if someone's like, oh, there's an issue when it comes to the house, it's sort of like we fill in the blanks. It just gives you another perspective. And so these questions are really meant to, in a way, I feel like your intuition kind of guides you to the cards that you choose. And the question is so open that it can feel like the perfect question asked at the right time. Yeah. So everything kind of like locks in. That's the intention behind the cards, at least. And the feedback seems to be supporting that.
And in our group, we have someone from Argentina. I mean, they're from all, you know, the nice thing about Zoom is you can get people from all over the world, and you can learn about other countries and cultures and everything.
Last night, the group seemed to be like divided between a core of people who sort of knew each other and were friendly, and some other people who were outside, and they blended really nicely. So, I mean, I think that's like an element of a good party, that you have some people who already have a history and can relate to each other. And then it works well if the other people there can fit in and have this wonderful device for pulling them in.
So yeah, there's actually at that party we had, I think, 14 people. So we keep our parties with a max of 25, and even 25 feels like we're pushing it a little bit. Like when it's around 20 people, I feel like it's small, it's intimate. Everyone gets a chance to sort of add something, a contribution in their own way. I only knew one person that night, and that person was a friend of mine, Jess, who's been to many of these, and she brought two people who she thought would love the experience, and that was the couple. Everyone else didn't know each other, and we have found that it's been very difficult. And I'm thank you so much for inviting me. First, I should have said that right out of the gate, because it's been somewhat of a difficult thing to explain what this thing is. It's not theater. We call it as like this hybrid of game night, storytelling, and aligned serendipity with the cards. But like when people have a really great experience, what we've been so blessed with is they come back with other people who they think would like it. And it's like a really beautiful sort of organically growing audience, or just pool of people, because, you know, once people have been once before and they know how it goes, they lean into their curiosity a little bit more. And then if there's someone brand new who's like, I just read about this thing, like, you know, there's an extended warmth and an extended generosity to them as well. And there's one other thing I just wanted to say, just to tie together what Jessica and Ezra were saying of like this moment as a renaissance. I think that is so incredibly beautiful and apt. And, you know, I think a lot of people in the theater world or in the live event world have been trying to figure out how to translate their experience online. But online is actually like a really incredible and beautiful platform. And at our party, our 2 parties ago, I think it was on the 16th, this person came and she stayed. They came. They stayed for the after party. We had this like we used Zoom for the first part, and then we used this really amazing platform called Gather Town, where you have like a little avatar and you can kind of like move around, and you have a little more autonomy in terms of who you speak with. And I was speaking with them and a couple of their friends who came. I never met them before, and they were about my age, like around 40. And they said, you know, when they were kind of growing up in a really small town, there weren't a lot of people like them. They were genderqueer, and so they had to go online to kind of find their community. And it feels like a sort of a return to that, or sort of this renaissance of like some people never had to do that, and isn't that great if like you always feel like really connected to the community? But for people who didn't, for people who, you know, who were a little bit on the outside, you know, marginalized people, like, you know, like we had to embrace this sort of technology 20 years ago in its infancy, and that this kind of feels like a really beautiful return, and the idea of like, hopefully not out of safety, but now out of curiosity, we can kind of go out and find community that we want to connect with. So I just think it's really beautiful that Jess and Ezra are thinking the same things with their project.
It's a way for instance, for a playwright to get a new workout without it costing $50,000. I mean, I did a festival last year for a play with 3 performances. It cost me $9 grand. I mean, this is, you know, and this is something we don't have to do with Zoom. So nice to meet you, Will, and good thing for what you're doing.
St. Anne's Warehouse, in conjunction with Landmark Productions and Project Arts Center, has brought us this wonderful Irish play by Mark Rowe called The Approach. It's a deceptively low-key play of 2 characters at a time having a conversation over coffee. Old mates, Cora and Anna, are catching up with each other, having a bit of a moan, and discussing relationship problems with men and sisters. Apparently, Anna's sister Denise stole the love of her life, Oliver, away from her, and she will never forgive her sister. Separately, Denise catches up with Cora and will never forgive her sister for not coming to the funeral of Oliver. Will Cora be able to mend fences between these 2 once close sisters? Will any of them ever end up in a successful relationship? Because a year or so passes between each encounters, certain facts that we heard before come out differently. So who is mistaken, or are they lying? The superb acting of Kathy Belton, Debbie Crotty, and Aislinn O'Sullivan made this compelling viewing over a somewhat cryptic story. So I give it a happy face minus. It's going on till January 31st. And speaking of Irish, Bina I saw something too at the Origins First Irish Festival. Mine's closed, but yours is going on to the 31st.
Yeah, I just, because you actually reminded me, and I've been watching it earlier, and then I just like did not write the review because it was stale in my mind. I just watched this play called Mustard by Fishamble Theatre Company, Eva O'Connor, who was in the last years also, and she's a fantastic, fantastic actress, a solo show. Its story is like she falls in love with she's an Irish, of course. She falls in love with an Englishman. She goes to England, you know, and he's very handsome and he's very rich and he's like a professional cyclist. And she has incredible sex with him and maybe sometime rough or whatever. But she is just like, she's consumed by this man. And finally, he just does not want her. He tells her in very blatant, awful fashion that I care for you, but please leave, you know? And she comes back to Ireland and she's in the mother's house. And what she does is she buys tons of mustard jars and then she puts all that mustard on her naked body all over the place. And it's amazing. She said this is the only thing which was exported from England. And it reminds her, I guess, of her boyfriend. And it's just like a little bit, you know, I feel like her body is burning with this mustard. It's yellow, bright, and warm and everything and strong. But mustard is not my favorite thing. So kind of like mother says you are mad. She sends her to a therapist that, you know, she likes the therapist. She heals a little bit. She goes swimming and all that. But, you know, I love the performance. But somehow the other, the metaphor of mustard with her love affair with the English man was a little bit difficult for me to relate to. But it's a great, great performance. And kind of reminded me a bit of Karen Finley, who used to put chocolate on her body, but it was a different issue. It was not a love affair, it was feminine kind of exposure of her sexuality to the world. But I give happy face little minus perhaps because of the mustard thing. I don't like mustard and it was like kind of icky, but she is a great performer. It's a wonderful show.
So it didn't quite pass mustard. And now we have Jay Michaels with his wonderful feature, Indie Influencers. Take it away, Jay.
Greetings. This is Jay Michaels for Indie Influencer on High Drama. Riddle me this, Batman. When is a healthy food like a theatrical company? When they're both fresh fruit. The Fresh Fruit Theater Festival, one of New York's most respected LGBTQ theatrical companies, was garnering accolades and honors before all the fun began last March. You'd think right now they'd probably be on hiatus considering everything, right? Wrong. Under the ingenious eye of executive director Louis Laparty, the company has become a film company as well as theatrical company, with their latest festival, which just passed, being a series of original stage monologues turned into independent films. The 8th Film Festival offered up superb examples of the human condition, but set them in celluloid. Now the company will be creating a series of radio plays based on stage works. Now, I bet you thought, well, after a film festival, they probably want to take a break, right? Wrong. The radio plays will begin with Doug.30th's The Fierce Urgency of Now, about prejudice in the advertising world against women and the gay community. DeVito was the perfect person to start this festival, as his plays are rapidly becoming screenplays right now and are being in development all across the country. He didn't have a film ready for the film festival now, did he? Right? Wrong. Nigel, by Doug.30, is a send-up of a Twilight Zone with a decidedly modern twist. And it was one of the high points of the festival. It featured genre celebrity Joe Moe in the title role of a young boy who was under the grip of his mother for most of his life, and then turned the tables. Film, art, radio, stage works, lectures. I guess that's certainly enough for the Fresh Fruit Festival, right? This is Jay Michaels for Indie Influencer on High Drama.
Eventually, we do want to bring up, Rebecca Luker, Ann Reinking, Lee Brewer, Roger Berlin, Bob Avey, and I please hope no one else that we love in the theater community dies, because really we love theater so much. And our next show is going to be...
And that's going to be on February 13th.
And who knows what interesting, more marvelous people we're going to be talking to.